Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode, talking about a QB data retroactive review. This has been a Patreon request for a while. A lot of you guys have been asking, can you kind of go back and look at all the draft classes based on the data you're doing? I know you're well intentioned. You do these videos. You're very confident in them. But can we just look back at all the other draft classes to see how the data actually works? And that's what we're going to do today. So buckle up, guys. Get your popcorn, get whatever other beverages and other things you need, because we're going to look at every single draft class from this year all the way back to 1999 to show you how the data stuff that I do works, some of the limitations to it, some of the things you kind of need to look at in terms of the differences between, say, a mobile quarterback and a passing quarterback, those other sort of things. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get into how I grade these guys. So if you are new to the channel, new to the stuff that I do, I look at the mobile quarterback score. You take raw statistics from a school website or college football reference. Those statistics are then transformed into market share scores. It's saved in the system. Those scores are then graded against positional peers. In this case, other quarterbacks. The main scores I've made is the offensive market share score for quarterbacks, the touchdown market share score, touchdown percentage, which is the number of touchdowns they have divided by the amount of rushes that they had, and then average yards per touch. All those things are added together to give the mobile quarterback score. So it's telling you how much of the offense they made up, how much of the touchdowns they made up on the ground, how much was their ability, when the ball was in their hands, how often did they get in the end zone, and then also how many yards they got per touch. All those things influence the mobile quarterback score. And the second score to look at is the quarterback score, say passing efficiency score. This data is also taken from raw statistics from a school website. You look at positional peers on a 10-year sample. It also takes into account strength of schedule and strength of team. So SOS is strength of schedule. That score is gotten from College Football Reference. You compare every strength of schedule score in their database to give you one single score. And then the SRS is the strength of team score, which is how strong was the team that they were on, which is also a very important thing to look at in terms of, contextually about their, production. Those scores are then ranked against positional peers in the database to give you a quarterback score. That is how the quarterback score is created. And then MEAV and PEAV, which I know are some big terms you probably haven't been familiar with, but the first one is mobile quarterback. So it looks at the expected approximate value of a quarterback. So MEAV takes into account things like their age, their production against the level of competition. It takes a look at their statistics. But the difference between these two scores is the MEAV takes a look at their mobile quarterback score in addition to all of their other data points, whereas the PEAV takes that mobile quarterback score out. And the reason why, which you're going to see in this video, is because quarterbacks have different styles nowadays. You have the classic pocket passer types, which, you're talking about guys like Joe Montana, Dan Marino is probably even a better example of that in terms of the pass. Of course, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. These are quarterbacks that are not going to be making a lot of plays with their legs. They're passers. They facilitate the offense. That's why people hate Brock Purdy so much because, even though he actually had decent mobile quarterback stuff. But neither here nor there. The PEAV looks at them as a passer. It takes away the mobile quarterback score. Don't even think about it because, again, why knock a quarterback who had a poor MEAV score when MEAV is not exactly as correlative as the actual passing statistics are? Although it is important to look at MEAV because we've seen the influx of quarterbacks nowadays where if they have a high mobile quarterback score and they have at least a decent amount of passing efficiency, they can be a decent quarterback at the next level. We've seen that in the last 25 years, which is what I'm about to show you improve through the data work that I've done. So with that context out of the way, let's just take a quick look at the 2024 class, just to throw that out there in case you were wondering. The 2024 class has two 90 plus percentile MEAV and PEAV. Basically, in other words, they have two 90 plus percentile mobile quarterbacks and two 90 plus percentile passing quarterbacks. Caleb Williams actually ends up being number two in both the MEAV and PEAV categories, with the main reason being that JJ McCarthy is just a much younger prospect and had great passing efficiency. Now, I've talked about some of the concerns with McCarthy in terms of having a very low run to pass ratio coming out of college. A lot of guys like that are either mobile quarterbacks, which he's clearly not. I mean, JJ McCarthy is not Jalen Hurts. He's not Kyler Murray. He's more of a pocket passer in many ways. So when you look at those types of things, you kind of worry a little bit because we had another guy in another class, which we're going to talk about, Justin Fields, who had great passing efficiency but played in a run-heavy offense. But this is basically how this class kind of stacks up. Taking a look at it, when you add in the other quarterbacks, I would say, just to throw this out there, Michael Pratt and Jordan Travis grade better as mobile quarterbacks, and Spencer Rattler and Michael Penix Jr. graded better as passers. So, in other words, Pratt and Travis have a better ability to maybe become like a mobile quarterback outlier in this class, whereas Rattler and Michael Penix Jr. have a better potential to be like a passing quarterback at the next level. So looking at the EAV scores for this particular class, again, just to finish it up, the top mobile quarterbacks in this class based on MEAV are J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels. And then, of course, Bo Nix. And then the top passing quarterbacks based on PEAV are McCarthy, Williams, May, Daniels, Bo Nix, and then you get into Rattler and Penix Jr. Those guys are kind of on the outskirts a little bit there, but there is, between Nix, Rattler, and Penix Jr., they're like this close in terms of their PAV. So however you want to rank them is however you want to rank them there based on that. But this is how the 2024 class kind of did. Now, moving on to 2023, this particular class was interesting because Hendon Hooker had the highest passing efficiency in that class with the best passing ability of a 94.55. The passing ability score takes into account their BQS and CQS. BQS is the best quarterback score, and CQS is their career quarterback score. But the problem with Hooker is his age. He was a very older prospect. Another interesting thing to point out about the 2023 class is Bryce Young tested well as a passer and as a mobile quarterback. So he had elite MEAV score and PEAV score, whereas Stroud only had an elite PEAV score. The biggest thing that kind of held Stroud back was his MQS score, his mobile quarterback score. He was a passer in the Ohio State offense. Whereas, Stroud only tested well as a passer. Stroud's overall passing ability was much better than Bryce Young, but Bryce Young's age and other factors did kind of make him to be the top quarterback. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to say, well, doesn't that mean that your data stuff doesn't matter? Well, not necessarily, because again, the data is not an exact science. It gets you in the right ballpark, if you will, and then you have to let film grades and everything else kind of go into it there. But so this is kind of how that class kind of stacked up when you look at the EAV scores. The mobile quarterback scores. Young was the top guy, followed by Max Duggan, Anthony Richardson, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Clayton Tune. And then the top passing quarterbacks was Young, Stroud, Duggan, Richardson, and Hooker. And again, a lot of that has to do with their age. And keep in mind, you're adding age in there to kind of signal potential development. So never draft a quarterback just because they're very young if they don't have great passing efficiency. We're going to see some examples of that as we go through the draft classes. But the bottom line with the 2023 class, the jury's still out on Bryce Young. He went to a very poor team. And again, believe me, people, well, Stroud went to Houston, and Houston wasn't that great either. I get all that stuff. But I think we still need to let some time to kind of marinate a little bit here. But the bottom line is again, using this data as just a ballpark figure for picking quarterbacks, I think it does pretty well in doing that. In 2023, it had the top two quarterbacks passing-wise, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. So if you had flipped a coin and picked one, you would have had a very good chance of getting a really great quarterback. And of course, you still have yet to see how Bryce Young develops. Moving on to the 2022 class. The 2022 class was odd because the best quarterbacks in Sam Howell and Brock Purdy, nobody wanted. Um, Purdy was the highest mobile quarterback with the highest MEAV score, and Howell was the top passer, the highest PEAV score. The same reasons that scouts didn't like Purdy and Howell were the same reasons they ended up where they're at now. Most coaches betted on physical upside versus actual development, which is a common theme, which we're going to see as we go through the draft classes here. But it's clear that you can see based on the MEAV and PEAV scores, Purdy was the top quarterback as a mobile quarterback, and Howell was the top passing quarterback, and Purdy was the second after that. So Purdy should have been drafted a lot higher than where he was, guys. Same thing with Howell. It's just that teams look at other things like physical metrics and how tall they are and how big they are to make their decisions versus just how they actually played on the football field. So that's going to be interesting to see how this kind of turns out with these two quarterbacks. You know, a lot of teams kind of want to move on. There's people who want to move on from Purdy already, even though he, led the NFL in passing efficiency last year. But we'll see where it goes. But this is kind of what the 2022 class looked like based on the metric stuff that I do. Again, looking at a ballpark, if you will. Going on to the 2021 class, the clear-cut number one prospect was Trevor Lawrence. Justin Fields had the best passing efficiency, but he did not have a run-to-pass ratio. But he did have a run-to-pass ratio knock that has manifested in the NFL. The jury is still out of Mac Jones and Sam Ehlinger, but even past Lawrence and Fields, there are still some kind of lingering issues with this class. So I'll admit that. I think in terms of Justin Fields, he had a below average, significantly below average run to pass ratio coming out of Ohio State. In other words, he had exceptional passing efficiency, but he also played in a run heavy offense. And those, I'm not going to say that's a red flag, but it definitely is a yellow flag. We still have yet to kind of see where Fields kind of goes. A lot of people are asking for the Chicago Bears to just move on from Fields and just forget about him and throw him to the air side. But at the same time, he has all of the numbers that made Jalen Hurts what Jalen Hurts was, in terms of having, decent passing efficiency and those other sort of traits there. So I think it was clear that Trevor Lawrence was the top quarterback, though. I mean, when you adjust for age and all those other factors, Lawrence was the best mobile quarterback and the best passing quarterback. So from that perspective, as you can clearly see here, it's clear Lawrence was the top quarterback all along, no matter what. But I think we still kind of need to see where Fields kind of goes with this. But it also shows some of the limitations with the data, which I'm going to be working on, is taking into account that run to pass ratio, because I do think that does affect the passing efficiency for quarterbacks. If you play at a team that has a really run heavy type system, you're going to have an easier ability to make better decisions with the football and to complete passes with the football when you don't have those as many issues. Moving on to 2022, that class, the 2022 class was headlined by Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, and Jalen Hurts. Joe Burrow's biggest issues were his age and how low his quarterback score was the first year he played at LSU. Burrow had literally a 360-degree improvement at LSU compared to what he was doing prior to that, breakout year. So that's kind of the biggest thing that kind of hurts this. But it's clear that you can see that, Tua, who has had kind of a lot of struggles in his career, he was the top quarterback here. But again, looking at the MAAV, which is the mobile quarterback score, and then the PAV, Burrow just didn't really have a shot at all in terms of the data here. This actually is going to probably go on to be a pretty good quarterback class, though. I mean, you look at Hurts, you look at Herbert, you look at Tua, you look at Jordan Love, of course, who finally developed this year, Joe Burrow. This is pretty decent if you look at it just from that perspective. But at the same time, I do understand a lot of people consider Joe Burrow. The consensus is Joe Burrow is the best quarterback from this class because he went to the Super Bowl and lost. And, of course, has had the most success against Patrick Mahomes. But if you just look at the data in general, as a ballpark figure, it was able to find a godly Jalen Hurts and kind of accurately measure his ability as a mobile quarterback. It obviously found Justin Herbert. Tua, of course, is on here. He's had some struggles and injuries and stuff like that. But for the most part, it is pretty accurate in terms of getting a ballpark area of where these quarterbacks tested. Even though Joe Burrow, again, most people consider him to be the top quarterback out of this particular class, but as I mentioned, there are limitations because of his age and because of the fact that he had this 360-degree improvement in his production because he was not that great passing efficiency wise the year prior at LSU based on the data stuff that I do. Moving on to 2019. 2019 was the Kyler Murray show with Dwayne Haskins as the best passer past Murray. Both Haskins and Murray had concerns relating to only having 1 year worth of experience. One can only wonder what Haskins might have become before his tragic death, but the 2019 class was weak, with the exception of Haskins and Murray. I think in general, the biggest thing that I have is that, the top quarterbacks in this class were Murray and Haskins. Both these guys only had 1 year of full starting experience at the college football level. That's just not a lot of starts. Of course, everybody knows where Daniel Jones ended up in terms of his career, which is kind of on ice right now. But I think in terms of this class, it was kind of really weak just because of having those guys who, had 90 plus percentile potential, but they never quite developed into the passers uh, that they should have been or maybe could have been. Um, so looking at the in the mobile quarterback EAV, you can clearly see that Murray was the top guy. Tyree Jackson was the second guy, though. Kind of interesting to see what happens with him maybe long term. I mean, not much has happened so far, but still. And then, of course, you have PEAV, which is where Murray was also the top guy. Moving to 2018, 2018 was by far the biggest outlier class, with the exception of Lamar Jackson. Jackson had an elite MEAV and PEAV score coming out, but Josh Allen only had an above average MEAV score in the 60 percentile. And Mayfield slash Darnold have all underperformed. So if there was one class where I kind of have to take an L data wise, it would have to be this class. I mean, looking at the MEAV scores, Darnold was the top mobile quarterback based on his MEAV, but and again, a lot of that was age kind of factoring into that. But again, you kind of have to take an L a little bit with this class because it was kind of all over the place. I think in terms of the data. So I think Lamar Jackson did kind of, he always had to be a guy who developed as a passer. Everybody knows Josh Allen definitely had to develop as a passer. So it doesn't really knock the data that much because it was clear that Jackson needed to develop. Same thing with Josh Allen. And in many ways, Lamar Jackson kind of struggled even after having that great 2019 season until this year. And then Josh Allen, of course, was a work in progress. But I think for the most part, this definitely was a year that was kind of all over the place in terms of the quarterbacks. I think if you just looked at the MEAV scores, you got Jackson, Mayfield, Allen, and then of course you got Rosen and Darnold and Barrett in there. That's not a bad group to be. Flip a coin, you might get a starting quarterback. But at the same time, it definitely was kind of inconsistent. I would say Allen probably is the biggest outlier out of every quarterback since 1999 based on the data work that I do. And nothing's really going to change that. Nobody really could have predicted what Allen became other than people that just love his film and love what he does on film. A team believed in him, they put the development in him, and they got what they got. But at the same time, based on data, he was a massive, massive risk that just happened to turn out. And then, of course, we go to 2017. This was Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. Watson was higher than Mahomes in his MEAV and PEAV, but it was clear that Watson was the most developed and had an immediate impact, whereas Mahomes developed into what he became today. So Watson's career is heading on the downward due to his off-the-field issues, but it's clear when you look at the MEAV and the PEAV that Watson and Mahomes should have been the top two quarterbacks out of that draft class. And Mitch Trubisky never really should have sniffed the first round in some ways, especially since he only had 1 year worth of production as well. A lot of these guys, like Murray and everybody else, just only 1 year worth of college production is not a lot to really get a good sample size to really be able to not see the issues there. But I think for the most part, this is a good ballpark for them. Again, Mahomes obviously is a Hall of Famer now. I think everybody would agree with that. whereas Watson is yeah, but again, if you look at the first year Watson entered the NFL and the years prior to that and his passing efficiency, he was among the top 5 passers in the NFL for a decent amount of time based on his passing efficiency. It's just all this other stuff off the field has kind of derailed his career. But I think you can kind of see again when I talk about the data, it's not going to pick the top quarterback every single time. It's just going to get you in the ballpark of where that guy might be, and then you can use film and other things like that to influence or get you to that decision. I think that's the biggest thing that the quarterback data really does. You know, moving on to 2016. 2016's top quarterback was Cody Kessler. Dak Prescott had the highest MEAV score though, and then Jared Goff had the second best PEAV score behind Cody Kessler. Kessler was older and his career never quite took off as a journeyman, which is true. Looking at the 2016 MEAV score, as you can clearly see, Dak Prescott was the top mobile quarterback in this particular draft class, and of course he went on to become a decent quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And then of course when you look at with development, of course, I mean Dak Prescott wasn't just out of the box amazing, but he did have the initial tools that reached that. And then of course when you look at the PAV score, Jared Goff became the second best passing quarterback based on his data, and you can clearly see that he's become that. He does have limitations as a passer. He's not an elite passer by any stretch of the imagination. But this is just kind of how 2016 entered. Moving on to 2015, this class was an interesting year with a lot of what-if prospects to me. Marcus Mariota has a run/pass ratio knock. Brett Hundley and Blake Sims are the biggest what-could-have-been types who also had run-to-pass ratio Knox, and then Winston's age pushed up his data score, but he never developed into a more efficient passer in the NFL. So when you look at the MEAV scores and PAAV scores, Mariota was the top quarterback as a mobile quarterback, but Winston was the top quarterback as a passing quarterback. But at the same time, Winston was not a 90 plus percentile passer coming out of college. He was more in the 60 percentile range, and he never quite developed as a passer, and that's the biggest thing to again remind you guys. There has to be some development with this as well, in terms of their development. They have to have good coaching. They have to go to the right team to kind of harness their ability that they did in college at the NFL level. But interesting class. Again, Mariota, Hundley, and Sims all had knocks coming out in terms of their run-to-pass ratios because, they came from kind of very run-heavy offenses. Not to say Mariota didn't end up on a team. The Tennessee Titans are a very run-heavy team, but he just wasn't able to really command the pocket. There was a lot of off-the-field things with Mariota. He didn't have that gusto to him that or leadership qualities. The fiery leadership qualities that a lot of teams and other players may gravitate to. But the bottom line is, again, it gives the general ballpark of things. I think Winston and Mariota being the top 2 quarterbacks of this draft class was accurate based on the data, and but it's just that they didn't really live up to their overall scores because they didn't develop into what they probably should have been. Going into 2014, this was the Johnny Manziel show. Teddy Bridgewater tested as the second best PEAV, followed by Connor Shaw, actually. And Derek Carr's biggest knock was his age and level of competition. No matter if you look at the MEAV or PEAV scores, Derek Carr just didn't quite, catch the top 5 area in terms of his, except for the PEAV score for his data. So Derek Carr, played at Fresno State, very low level of competition for the most part there. And again, he has become a starting NFL quarterback, but in a lot of ways he's kind of like an outlier in the same way Matt Ryan is, which we're going to see coming up. And this class is very similar to that class in some ways. Manziel, of course, probably the biggest bust from this particular draft class, but one could only wonder what he could have been if he didn't have as many character issues and other sort of things like that, because he was a fantastic college player based on his overall data. Moving on to the 2013 class. 2013 was Geno Smith and everyone else. EJ Manuel had the best traits, but Smith has become a journeyman starter, whereas EJ Manuel is out of the NFL. This class was probably one of the worst classes since 1999, but you're going to see some worse classes coming up, guys. I know a lot of people want to rag on 2013, saying it was the worst draft class ever. In some ways, it was. But in terms of Geno Smith, he did become at least a starter, in the Seahawks so far, after being kind of a journeyman backup. But yeah, this was a very poor class. And of course, when you look at the top MEAV, it was Geno Smith, and the top PEAV, it was Geno Smith. So moving to 2012, Andrew Luck was considered a generational prospect, but his data said otherwise. RG3 and Russell Wilson, and then Luck were the top MEAV or mobile quarterbacks, while RG3 Brock Osweiler, who never developed as a passer, again, his age is really what helped Brock Osweiler a lot, and then Luck were the top three passers. Again, given the general ballpark of this class, looking at it from that kind of perspective, Robert Griffin III was always the top quarterback based on data. Of course, he had multiple injuries and just lots of just weird stuff happened in Washington that kind of derailed his career. But it was clear that you could see Russell Wilson right there. The number two best mobile quarterback was Russell Wilson, and of course followed by Andrew Luck. Nick Foles is even on there too, as the fourth best mobile quarterback. However you want to look at it, the only big outlier from this class realistically was Kirk Cousins. Ryan Tannehill would also be kind of considered an outlier to a certain extent, because he became a starter. But this is 2012 in a nutshell, guys. The top quarterback was always RG3, based on data, of course, followed by Russell Wilson, followed by Andrew Luck, followed by Nick Foles. Brock Osweiler, of course, was pushed up because of his age, but his overall passing ability in college was terrible. 45.91 is awful. So there was some development there that never happened with him. But that is 2012 in a nutshell. Moving on to 2011. Stay with me, guys. Stay with me. All right, 2011. We get to Cam Newton. Cam Newton, and then Greg McElroy, followed by everybody else. It's insane to think that Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, Christian Ponder were all drafted in the first round out of this particular draft class. Cam Newton's biggest knock was only having 1 year of FBS starting production. He only started 1 year at Auburn before he entered the NFL. But Newton's career was fun. His early part of his career was definitely fun. This class overall has a lot of, Andy Dalton, Colin Kaepernick, of course. A lot of people want to knock him taking a knee, but he was never that great of a passer at the NFL if you just look at his statistics. Other than his touchdown to interception ratio was decent. He made good decisions with the football, but just wasn't really great at completing passes. When you look at the MEAV and the PEAV, Cam Newton dominates both of these areas, followed by Greg McElroy, Tyrod Taylor, Ryan Mallett, and then you get into Blaine Gabbert, that other sort of territory. But this class was not really that great based on overall data, with the exception of Cam Newton was had close percentile on everything. Of course, Greg McElroy never really got an opportunity. He was more of a pocket passer type who never quite, made. I think he ended up on the Jets and then kind of fizzled out. Moving to 2010. 2010 was Sam Bradford and Tim Tebow. A lot of you guys talk about the worst quarterback draft classes. And to me, this would kind of be up there, guys, in terms of the data not really getting it right at all. Tebow was the top MEAV or mobile passer, whereas Bradford was the top PEAV in terms of passing ability. Both Bradford and Tebow failed to have long, consistent careers in the NFL, but this class does qualify as one of the worst since many were out of the NFL in 4 seasons, with the exception of a couple guys here and there. I know Colt McCoy has become a pretty decent commentator, and again, nothing to knock Colt McCoy. He had great BQS score, great CQS score. And then, of course, Zach Robinson, same thing. Zach Robinson, of course, making moves in the NFL as a coach. But when you look at the 2010 class as a whole, it's kind of and of course, Bradford, had injuries and stuff. And of course, Tim Tebow was, what Tim Tebow was. But interesting, nevertheless. 2010, looking at MEAV, Tebow was the top guy. Looking at PEAV or passing EAV or expected approximate value, Bradford was the top guy. But of course, neither one of them had the types of careers that you would expect based on their testing. Moving on to 2009. 2009 was an odd class of quarterbacks. The top MEAV or mobile quarterback was Matthew Stafford. And then the top PAV was Mark Sanchez. However, he only had 1 year of starting experience at USC in terms of a full year of starts. Josh Freeman was the number 2 mobile quarterback. Freeman is probably the biggest what if from this class because his career should have been better based on his production, but this is definitely a class that is interesting. You know, it had the top quarterback as a mobile quarterback as Matthew Stafford. I think if you took into account the knock of 1 year worth of production, which I think teams should do, then it would always be Stafford as the top guy because Sanchez again didn't have you know a long a long line uh, of production with him. You know, in terms of having multiple seasons of starts. You know, Stafford was a more seasoned quarterback from that perspective. So that's 2009 in a nutshell. Moving on to 2008. 2008 was divided up into the quarterbacks who looked like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning versus the other guys. Because again, I know it's a cliche, but it's the big, tall, white quarterback. That's Matt Ryan. He's a big, tall, white quarterback. Joe Flacco is a big, tall, white quarterback. Not to sound racist, but just if you look at them on film and you squint a little bit, they kind of look alike, you know, because they got the similar frame and, um, you know, how they talk, different stuff like that. Matt Ryan, though, was the biggest outlier from this class. He was the best quarterback from this class, statistically speaking. Um, but his data coming out, you know, he was older. He was a much older prospect, which definitely hurt him. And then on top of that, he did play at Boston College, which was not the best competition ever. I do not have Delaware production to grade Joe Flacco. I've been looking for it for years. I might have to actually go to Delaware to get like a media guide to get their production data. But it's not really readily available on the internet. The top data performers from this class, though, Troy Smith, Pat White, and Eric Ainge, never got opportunities to develop, with the exception of Pat White. You know, there was a minute there where the Miami Dolphins were kind of doing stuff with Pat White a little bit, but he just was so undersized, you know, for the NFL to a certain extent, you know, because he had some injuries here and there. But this is definitely a very inconsistent class. Very similar to 2018, but not really even the same because there was like 2 quarterbacks and most of the guys. I mean, regardless of what Matt Ryan did as a consistent starter for the Atlanta Falcons, he was just an okay passer. You know, he was like an average passer with some heights here and there, you know, to him. And then of course Chad Henne, everybody knows about Chad Henne, if you will. But yeah, this is yeah, not the best as a quarterback class goes. Moving on to 2007, a lot of people want to say that the 2013 class was the worst class, but this is worse. Looking at this class, the best passer overall was Trent Edwards. The best MEAV or mobile quarterback was Drew Stanton. The overall class was just not good. I don't think there's really much else to say about it. There was no 90 plus percentile mobile quarterback or passing quarterback. Looking at again, the top guys, Drew Stanton was the top mobile quarterback, and then Trent Edwards was the top passing quarterback. So, not that great. Moving on to 2006. The 2006 gets a lot of hype as a great quarterback class that did not live up to expectation, but there were no 90 plus percentile MEAV or PAV prospects. This is probably where age kind of becomes less of a factor in terms of evaluating these players because, you know, for the most part, quarterbacks stayed in school for multiple seasons. You know, they stayed in school for 3, 4, 5 seasons, or at least 3 seasons, if you will, before they actually made it to the NFL. So, um, but this is definitely a class where there was no 90 plus percentile MEAV or PAV starter. The top PEAV guy was Leinart, and the top MEAV guy was in Vince Young. But as you can clearly see, their data was, you know, okay. I definitely can see the ability Leinart had. I mean, there was a lot of question marks with him, if you will, but he definitely was not like a 90 plus percentile passer based on the data stuff. Moving on to 2005. Of course, here we go again. Vince Young, Matt Leinart, if you will. Uh, on to 2005. 2005 was Aaron Rodgers followed by Kyle Orton. Rodgers was always the top quarterback out of this class. Orton was the biggest what if because he never really quite had a consistent career as a starter or went to the right. It was a lot of imagine if you went here is kind of what it is with Kyle Orton because he definitely had great overall data for him. And then Jason Campbell did the best he could as the third best overall passer from this class. Looking at the data here, Aaron Rodgers was the top guy in terms of his MEAV and PAV scores. Whether you look at him as a mobile quarterback or as a passing quarterback, he was always the top guy, followed by Kyle Orton. Andrew Walker was in the 70 plus percentile in terms of his MEAV score. And then he also was the fourth best. If you're a Raiders fan, you know who Andrew Walter is. And you kind of don't want to remember him. But this is kind of where things stack up for 2005 for the most part. Moving on to 2004. We're almost done, guys. We're getting there. We're getting there. 2004 is where the data gets a little wonky. Quarterbacks tended to stay in college a lot longer. But I think when you look at the top PEAV passers in Philip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Schaub, followed by Eli Manning later, this shows the data's applicability. So taking a look at the right chart. This shows you all the top passing quarterbacks out of that draft class. And Rivers, Roethlisberger, Schaub, Jeff Smoker, of course, didn't really do much, and then Eli Manning. I think that's a pretty clear cut, makes sense for it. If you were to look at this data back then, and you're trying to just make a decision on a passing quarterback from that era, I think you wouldn't do too poorly picking a guy like Philip Rivers or Ben Roethlisberger or even Matt Schaub, because Matt Schaub was always a better passer than Eli Manning long term. I know that's a little bit controversial. Of course, Matt Schaub never went to the Super Bowl and beat Tom Brady twice, but again, if Matt Schaub was on a much better team, what could have been, if you will? Moving on to 2003. 2003 was not a strong class at all. Carson Palmer was not a strong prospect as a mobile quarterback or a passing quarterback. Ken Dorsey was the only 80 plus percentile passer in this class. And of course, Cliff Kingsbury never had a chance as an air raid quarterback in 2003. This definitely is a interesting class because again, Carson Palmer was probably the best quarterback from this class, but when you look at the data, he just didn't really have a great mobile quarterback score, didn't have a great passing quarterback score. Palmer had a very long career at USC. I think in terms of the biggest thing that kind of pulled him down was his CQS score for him. But this kind of shows you the limitations. When you go back further into like the olden days, this is where things kind of get a little wonky in terms of the data. But I think passing ability wise, Carson Palmer was the best from this class. But when you adjust it for age, he definitely didn't quite hit those marks. Moving on to 2002. 2002 was probably the worst quarterback class since 1999. There were no 90 plus percentile MEAV or PEAV quarterbacks. Harrington had the best shot to become an outlier due to his BQS score, but he never quite developed. When you look at this class, you just kind of, because both Joey Harrington and David Carr were first round draft picks. And I think when you look at their data, it was just not that great in terms of passing ability and everything else like that. These guys should never have been first round quarterbacks. Again, if you think 2013 was bad, just look at this, because a lot of these guys were starters for teams and were starters for a decent amount of time before teams finally moved on. And of course, I know a lot of people will say, well, David Carr never had a great offensive line and stuff like that. And again, I'm not trying to throw dirt on David Carr's name. It's just based on their data coming out, there's a lot of concerns. Moving on, 2001. 2001 was Drew Brees and Michael Vick. Brees was always a better passer, and you were betting on Vick to develop as a passer, which didn't happen until his stint with Andy Reid on the Philadelphia Eagles. Brees was knocked by his height, but as you can clearly see so far, why what a prospect looks like on the outside should never really influence how he does on the football field, guys. However you look at this class, in terms of mobile quarterback or even passing quarterback, Brees was always the guy, followed by Michael Vick. Michael Vick definitely had tremendous ability as a mobile quarterback. He always had the better mobile quarterback score in this particular draft class. Of course, you see Mr. Sage Rosenfels down there, with an interesting mobile quarterback score as well. But in terms of this class, again, it was always Drew Brees, followed by Vick. It's just that Brees didn't have the traits that NFL teams are looking for. He wasn't tall. He played at a weird offense at Purdue. But you can clearly see that why this data is still applicable. No matter what year you go to, you're going to hit the right ballpark in terms of who the best quarterbacks are going to be for the most part in any given year. And then let's go to 2000, of course. Tom Brady. Tom Brady was the best. He was a top passer based on passing ability. Brady's age hurt his PEAV because T. Martin was the top PEAV passer due to his age. So, in other words, Brady's age kind of dropped him a bit when you do the adjusted production for his age, but there was no reason why Brady should have fell as far as he did based on his data. So, the top mobile quarterbacks then was T. Martin. The top passing quarterback was T. Martin. But no matter where you look, as a mobile quarterback or as a passing quarterback, Tom Brady was always at least the second best or third best quarterback. And of course, when you look at passing ability, Brady was always the best passer out of that draft class. So no matter what you look at here, guys, it was always clear that Tom Brady was a quarterback that should have went a lot higher than he did. Obviously, the data didn't predict Brady consistently as a top quarterback, only on passing ability because of the age knocks and stuff like that. But this could kind of give you a clear idea of the data's applicability in different eras versus today, if you will. Moving on to the last draft class. We finally made it, guys. 40 minutes later, we're finally here. But 1999. 1999 was the first major influx of mobile quarterbacks coming into the NFL, at least into the modern era that we know, the 2000s era. McNabb was a 90 plus percentile MEAV passer, and Tim Couch was the top passer with a 90 plus percentile PEAV score. Cade McNone was the top MEAV passer, but McNabb and Culpepper carried torches that led to what we see today. So when you look at the mobile quarterback score, Cade McNown was the top quarterback based as a mobile quarterback. But when you look at Donovan McNabb and Culpepper, they were right below him. So the general ballpark was right in terms of McNabb and Culpepper being the best sort of mobile quarterbacks at the next level. When you look at the PAV, most of these guys didn't really turn out that well. Tim Couch, of course, kind of struggled a little bit. Joe Germain, nobody remembers him. And of course, Cade McNown, not much there. But again, the mobile quarterbacks did much better out of this draft class compared to past draft classes. Guys like McNabb and Culpepper definitely hit that areas for you. And of course, Aaron Brooks was kind of there. But the biggest sort of bust, if you would, be Tim Couch. But this is it, guys. This is as far back as I could possibly. I mean, I could go a lot farther than this. I might do this for other positions, but I just want to show you guys the data that I use in the context of the data. So again, the quarterback data scores that I do are done in such a way to give context for the production. It's not like, okay, this guy scored the best, so he's the quarterback. You also have to treat it as a ballpark. He hit with this range of quarterbacks. So out of this particular draft class, which one are we going to take? A lot of that decision also has to be with your film, with your interviews, getting to know the player, psychological stuff, all that stuff wrapped into one needs to be done to make the decision. But you can clearly see that the data does a good job of getting in the right ballpark of who the top quarterbacks are going to be in any given year. Kind of warning you a little bit in some years as well. But this is kind of where we're at. So this was again, every single draft class from 2024 until 1999. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment below. And I just thank you guys for watching this video. I know it's a lot longer. You can speed it up if you want, or just go to the different individual sites. But again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!